Ayesha Rahman and Daniel Rahman looked like the kind of couple people admired without question, but the night Daniel died, everything that seemed stable began to rot from the inside out. Ayesha's shaking hands and stunned expression convinced everyone she was a broken wife. Yet beneath that carefully controlled shock was a secret so dark it rewrote their entire marriage. As investigators slowly peeled back the layers of Daniel's sudden death, the truth revealed a chilling reality. The woman who appeared most devastated had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone could imagine. From the outside, the marriage appeared calm, balanced, and even admirable. The husband was known as a steady man who believed deeply in routine and loyalty. He trusted his wife without hesitation and often spoke of her as the center of his life. To neighbors and relatives, their home looked peaceful, filled with order and quiet comfort. There were no loud arguments, no visible signs of conflict, and nothing that suggested danger. This clean image was exactly what the wife wanted the world to see. Inside the house, however, her emotions were far from gentle. She felt bored by the predictability of her life and increasingly irritated by her husband's presence. What once felt like stability now felt like a cage. She began to see him less as a partner and more as an obstacle standing between her and the freedom she believed she deserved. Still, she never allowed these feelings to show. Her expressions of care became more careful, more controlled, as if she were practicing for an audience that was always watching. The wife paid close attention to details most people ignored. She memorized her husband's daily habits, his eating patterns, his sleep schedule, and his health concerns. Every cough, every complaint of fatigue, and every minor illness was stored in her mind. She asked questions that sounded loving but were actually calculated. Her kindness was deliberate, designed to remove suspicion and build trust even deeper than before. Over time, a dangerous idea settled quietly into her thoughts. It did not arrive as anger or rage, but as a solution that felt logical to her. She convinced herself that removing her husband would not be cruelty, but necessity. The thought grew stronger each day, shaped by patience rather than impulse. While the husband continued to live unaware, believing his marriage was safe, the wife was already planning a future where he would exist only as a memory, and she would finally be free. The idea did not turn into action overnight. The wife understood that mistakes were made by those who acted too quickly, so she chose patience as her strongest weapon. She began spending long hours researching illnesses that could appear suddenly and worsen quietly. Her searches were careful and scattered, mixed in with harmless topics to avoid attention. She studied medical reports, symptoms, and how certain conditions were often misjudged as natural causes. Every detail mattered, and she treated the planning like a long-term project rather than a desperate act. At the same time, she adjusted her behavior at home. She became softer, more attentive, and unusually supportive. Meals were prepared with special care, and she encouraged routines that appeared healthy on the surface. The husband started feeling more tired than usual, but nothing severe enough to cause alarm. Doctor visits brought no clear answers, which only strengthened her confidence. Each normal test result reassured her that her approach was working. She also began organizing financial matters with precision. Documents were reviewed, policies updated, and records cleaned. Nothing was rushed, and nothing was left incomplete. Every change had a reasonable explanation. To anyone observing from the outside, it looked like responsible planning for the future. In reality, it was preparation for a life without her husband. The wife carefully monitored time. She knew there had to be a moment when the situation would feel believable and unavoidable. She waited until the husband's growing weakness fit the story she had been building for months. Her control never slipped into visible cruelty. There were no arguments, no sudden changes, and no emotional explosions. Everything remained calm. By the end of this phase, the plan was no longer an idea, but a quiet certainty. The wife felt prepared, confident, and untouchable. She believed that when the moment came, the world would see only tragedy. The final night arrived without warning to anyone except the wife. The house was unusually quiet, wrapped in the comfort of routine that had been carefully maintained for months. The husband followed his normal schedule, unaware that this ordinary evening would be his last. There were no raised voices, no visible tension, and nothing that suggested danger. Everything looked peaceful, exactly as the wife had planned. As the night progressed, the husband began to feel unwell. His body reacted slowly, just as she had expected. The symptoms did not appear dramatic or sudden enough to cause immediate panic. He grew weaker, his movements slowed, and his breathing became uneven. The wife remained close, watching carefully while making sure nothing looked forced or suspicious. Every minute mattered, and she paid attention to the smallest changes. When he finally collapsed, the moment felt unreal even to her. She waited just long enough to make the situation believable, then alerted emergency services. By the time help arrived, the damage had already been done. The husband's condition deteriorated rapidly, leaving no opportunity for recovery. His death appeared sudden, tragic, and unexplained. There were no marks on his body and no signs of struggle anywhere in the house. Neighbors later recalled seeing the wife overwhelmed with shock. Her hands trembled, and her face showed disbelief and fear. The scene matched what people expected from someone who had just lost their partner. Authorities examined the home and found nothing unusual. The environment was clean, calm, and undisturbed. The husband was pronounced dead, and his passing was treated as a heartbreaking medical event. The wife's reaction convinced everyone watching that she was just as surprised as they were. As the body was taken away, sympathy surrounded her from all sides. No one questioned her tears. No one imagined that the quiet night had not been an accident, but the final step of a plan that had been. In the days that followed, the wife stepped fully into the role she had prepared for. She moved through the house slowly, as if the weight of loss had drained her strength. She followed every morning custom with care, choosing silence over emotion when others were near. Her appearance reflected sorrow, and her behavior appeared fragile yet controlled. People around her describe her as brave, someone facing tragedy with quiet dignity. She managed practical matters without delay. Arrangements were made quickly, paperwork was handled neatly, and responsibilities were taken on without complaint. This efficiency was praised as strength, not questioned as calculation. She accepted sympathy without resistance and allowed others to believe she was barely holding herself together. Every tear, every pause, and every moment of stillness seemed natural. The funeral passed without incident. The wife remained composed, never drawing attention to herself, never collapsing in a way that felt excessive. She stayed close to familiar faces and avoided long conversations. To those watching, she appeared deeply affected but respectful of the moment. Nothing about her behavior suggested guilt or relief. The performance was subtle and convincing. After the public rituals ended, her routine returned to normal faster than expected. She kept the house clean, slept regular hours, and maintained a predictable schedule. While some saw this as her way of coping, others quietly noticed how quickly she adapted to being alone. The absence of chaos was striking. Grief, in her case, did not disrupt her life. Authorities completed their initial reports and found no reason to continue looking deeper. The death remained classified as natural. The wife was left alone with her freedom and the image she had carefully built. To the world, she was a victim of sudden loss. In reality, she was a woman who had successfully hidden the truth behind calm behavior and well-timed sorrow. Time passed, and the attention surrounding the death slowly faded. The wife continued living quietly, rarely speaking about the loss unless asked. She appeared focused on rebuilding her life, handling responsibilities with calm precision. To most people, the story had ended. The tragedy had been accepted, filed away, and forgotten. But beneath the surface, the case had not fully settled. A routine review of financial records brought the first subtle shift. The husband's life insurance policy had been significantly increased only months before his death. The timing raised quiet concern, especially since no clear reason for the change had been recorded. This discovery did not cause alarm on its own, but it was enough to prompt a closer look. The file was reopened without the wife's knowledge. Medical professionals were asked to revisit the case. Reports from the night of the death were compared with earlier health records. Small inconsistencies began to appear. The symptoms described did not fully align with the official cause of death. The husband had shown signs of gradual decline that were not typical of sudden natural failure. What once seemed unremarkable now felt incomplete. Preserved medical samples were sent for further testing. These tests were ordered quietly, without publicity or explanation. Investigators moved slowly, careful not to alert the wife or disrupt her routine. At the same time, they reviewed past activity, including doctor visits and prescription records. Patterns began to form, suggesting the decline had been guided rather than accidental. The image of a random medical tragedy started to weaken. Each detail on its own seemed harmless, but together they created a picture that could no longer be ignored. What had been dismissed as bad luck was now surrounded by unanswered questions. The case, once closed, had taken its first step toward revealing a much darker truth. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the hidden pattern became. Toxicology results revealed traces of a rare substance in the husband's system, one that closely imitated symptoms of natural illness. It was not commonly tested for during initial examinations, which explained why it had gone unnoticed. This discovery shifted the entire direction of the investigation. What was once considered an unfortunate death now carried the weight of intent. Authorities returned to the house with fresh eyes. Items that had seemed ordinary before were now examined carefully. Cleaning products, containers, and household supplies were cataloged and tested. Digital records were reviewed in detail, including search histories and purchase activity. Investigators uncovered online research related to illnesses and substances that matched the toxicology findings. The searches had been spaced out and mixed with everyday topics, suggesting careful planning. Financial records were reviewed again, this time alongside timelines. Purchases of unusual items lined up closely with the husband's declining health. None of these discoveries alone proved guilt, but together they formed a consistent narrative. The wife's calm behavior after the death now appeared less like strength and more like control. Investigators also revisited witness observations. Neighbors and acquaintances had previously described the wife as devoted and caring. When questioned again, some recalled small details they had dismissed earlier. Her lack of panic, her structured routine, and her rapid adjustment to life alone now seemed unusual. These details added emotional context to the physical evidence. By this stage, the investigation had moved beyond suspicion. The death was no longer viewed as natural, but as carefully engineered. The wife's image began to fracture under the weight of facts. The truth had remained hidden not because it was invisible, but because it had been designed to blend perfectly into normal. As the evidence accumulated, pressure began to close in around the wife. Investigators compared her earlier statements with newly established timelines. Small differences emerged, not dramatic enough to draw attention at first, but consistent enough to raise concern. Details about routines, dates, and medical symptoms no longer aligned perfectly. What once sounded confident now felt rehearsed. The wife was brought in for further questioning as a routine procedure. Her behavior remained calm, but subtle changes appeared. Her responses became more controlled, and her certainty wavered when faced with specific evidence. She avoided direct explanations and relied on general statements rather than clear facts. The image of shock she had presented earlier no longer matched the situation unfolding around her. Investigators reconstructed the final weeks of the husband's life step by step. They traced patterns in his health decline, diet, and daily habits. When these patterns were placed alongside the wife's actions, the connection became difficult to dismiss. Each decision she had made now appeared purposeful rather than supportive. Experts reviewed her behavior after the death and identified signs of emotional detachment masked as composure. The consistency of her actions suggested preparation rather than reaction. This analysis further weakened her credibility. The role she had played so carefully began to fall apart under professional scrutiny. By this stage, the investigation no longer focused on what happened, but on how long it had been planned. The idea that the death was spontaneous was completely abandoned. The wife's carefully built identity as a grieving partner collapsed. The mask she had worn so convincingly was no longer able to hide the reality beneath it. The case was approaching its final and unavoidable conclusion. As the investigation tightened, the wife found herself at the center of growing scrutiny. The case reached its end with a clarity that left little room for doubt. Investigators formally concluded that the husband's death had been caused deliberately, not by fate or illness. The evidence painted a complete picture from the early planning to the final moments. What had once seemed like a tragic loss was now understood as a carefully executed crime. The wife's actions before, during, and after the death aligned too perfectly to be dismissed as coincidence. The findings shocked those who had supported her. Friends and acquaintances struggled to reconcile the calm, grieving figure they remembered with the reality revealed by the investigation. Her display of shock on the night of the death became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. It showed how convincingly someone could hide intention behind emotion. The performance had been so believable that it delayed the truth for months. Legal proceedings followed, built on detailed timelines, scientific results, and behavioral analysis. The story presented was not one of sudden anger or loss of control, but of patience and calculation. The wife had believed that quiet planning would protect her, that a crime without chaos would go unnoticed. Instead, the same order she relied on exposed her. The husband's life was re-examined not as a medical mystery, but as a warning. Trust, routine, and familiarity had made him vulnerable. His death became a reminder that danger does not always arrive loudly or violently. Sometimes it comes wrapped in care and calm. The story closed with a chilling truth. The most frightening crimes are not always committed in moments of rage, but in silence. Behind carefully managed emotions and convincing reactions, a deadly plan had unfolded. By the time the truth surfaced, it was already too late, leaving only consequences and a lesson that appearances can be dangerously misleading.